We want to especially welcome Reverend Ruth Forbel Jensen, who's here with us. She's going to actually dedicate our new plaque outside the church, our anniversary plaque, just after church. So will you welcome Reverend Ruth Forbel Jensen? I met Reverend Elder Ken Martin when I was probably about 23 or 24 years old. I heard him sing at a general conference. I heard him sing "To God Be the Glory" in San Francisco in 1974. And then I heard him preach in Chicago, Illinois, and I was pastoring in Detroit, and it was the most fun thing to drive to Chicago and hear Reverend Ken or be at a district conference. Ken Martin is what we call a preacher's preacher. In addition to having the joy and pleasure of appointing him to be an elder in MCC, and to see his global work in Asia and in many countries all around the world, in helping churches to grow into healthy churches and mentoring many, many pastors for decades. Ken is the kind of preacher that preachers want to show up and hear. And so, without further ado, let's welcome, for the first time, to SunCoast Metropolitan Community Church, Reverend Elder Ken Martin.
I want first to thank your pastors and your board and all of you for the invitation to be with you this weekend. I came here to share an anniversary with you and didn't realize it was going to turn into a kind of reunion for me. I've gotten to see so many people here this weekend that I hadn't seen in so long. So many of us share so much history. And, you know, when Nancy talked about us knowing each other, that's 46 years, Nancy. We've been doing this for 46 years. Everything doesn't last that long in this world today. Yes. So these are treasured memories that we are talking about here. And I'm thankful for all of those of you with whom I share this history and all of these memories. And all of you I've gotten to meet for the first time this weekend. I don't know how I missed your church. I've been in every church all around you and had just never been here before. I guess it was just supposed to be this time to come here for the first time, because it has been a real joy, and your hospitality is just unmatched, and I had a wonderful, wonderful time, and I thank you for that. There is a Welsh poet and priest who always talks about God as the one out there, the one who is somewhere ahead of us, the one who is always calling us to new places. And then he says, when we get there, God will already be gone, because God will already be in the next place that we're going to be called. And so he says, when we get there, if we're fortunate, we may see her footprints in the sand. We may smell his fragrance on the breeze, but God will already be in the next place that we're going to be called to go, and where we're going to be called to minister next. And so he says, our job becomes God spotting. Our job becomes trying to keep up with God. Our job becomes listening carefully so that we can discern where we are supposed to go next and what it is that we are supposed to do next. I often think about that when our churches reach these important milestones, like a 25th anniversary celebration, because these are times that are filled with possibility and the potential of reclaiming and reshaping our dreams for the future. But how do we do that? How are we supposed to know what to do next and where to go next? Fortunately, our faith story is full of fascinating people and interesting events, and sometimes just direct advice about how to do that. For example, the writer of Hebrews, who was advising the early church, which frequently had no idea what it was supposed to do next, gives us 3 very good pieces of advice in those verses that were read to us. And the first one is in verse 32 and 3. But recall those earlier days when, after you had been enlightened, you endured a hard struggle with sufferings, sometimes being publicly exposed to abuse and persecution, and sometimes being partners with other people who were being treated that way. First of all, hold the past in remembrance. Hold the past in remembrance. I think I probably know enough about MCC churches generally to be able to assume with a high level of confidence that regardless of who you are or why you are here today, you didn't get here easily.
All right.
By the time most of us get here, we did not get here easily. Individually, we did not get here easily. Nancy, you were at that 1987 first big march in Washington for LGBT rights. Was anybody else here at that march? 1987? Yeah, here's some people who were there. I remember that bright morning when MCCers from all over were asked to meet in one special place and form a unit. I think it was in a little park on Pennsylvania Avenue. And I remember Reverend Perry trying to herd us all in there, keep us together because we were all so excited. The parade monitors told us that the parade would start somewhere behind us and it would come up and go past us, but at a certain point they would stop and open up a space for our unit to step in. And so they said, once you're in the parade, be sure you stay in the parade, because there were people lined up on the sides of the street, cheering us on. And sure enough, our time came and we stepped into that parade. And the National Forest Service, which is responsible for these kinds of things, said at that point, this was the largest group of people who had ever gathered in our nation's capital for any purpose. So when we stepped into that parade, you could look ahead of you and behind you and see literally hundreds of thousands of people marching with banners and flags and bells and drums. It was just, the energy was unbelievable. And sure enough, after we had marched for a little while, we stopped to let another unit come in to the parade. And I was standing there talking to the Christian writer Philip Yancey, who marched with us that day. He wrote about it later in one of his books. And so we were chatting, and I turned and looked over just about as far as near to that door from me. There was a young man standing on the curb, and he was looking at me and smiling. And I just smiled back at him and then turned back around, and we were chatting a little bit more. And a couple of minutes later, I turned around and looked, and he was still standing there, just smiling at me. Sometimes you think, if I don't do this right now, I'm going to regret it for the rest of my life. I broke the rules, and I stepped out of the parade, and I went over there and stepped up on the curb, and we just put our arms around each other and just hugged. And he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "California." "Where are you from?" And he said, "Louisiana." And then he whispered something in my ear that I will never forget. He whispered these words, "I know what it took for you to get here today. I know what it took." Now, a lot of people would say, "That's silly. He didn't know you." There's no way. You don't think it's silly, do you? I know what it took for you to get here today. First, we are urged to remember what we have already been through. Remember where you came from. Remember how far you have come. Remember what it took to get from where you used to be to where you are this morning. Remember when you doubted you'd ever be able to look back and say, there was something really wrong back there, but it wasn't me. It was everybody and everything trying to keep me from being the person that God created me to be. Remember these words from Walt Whitman. He said, reevaluate everything you were ever told at home or at church or in school, and dismiss everything that insults your soul. Dismiss everything that insults your soul. We know there's still a lot of people around who think that many of us here today are weak or flawed or damaged or unacceptable in some way, but you know what? Most of them wouldn't last 5 minutes if they had to be us and live in the world with them. Individually, we did not get here easily. I know that as a church community, you did not get here easily. When I was in college, I pastored a Southern Baptist church in Hot Springs, Arkansas, and we outgrew the sanctuary. Southern Baptist Convention headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee, sent us an architect to design the new building free, then sent us a development officer to head up our capital campaign, sent 2 evangelists to preach revivals to keep everybody excited about it, and then loaned us $500,000 at 1% interest. How much did you have with that when you were doing all this? As a church community, I know you didn't get here easily. We're part of a movement that struggled to be 50 years old. I came into MCC a few months after the 1973 fire in New Orleans. In Jim Downs' book, Stand By Me, The Forgotten History of Gay Liberation, he says that even though 32 people died in that fire, there was almost no coverage in national mainstream media about it at all. He says that the little coverage there was in and around New Orleans contained jokes that the local people made about the people who died in that fire. He said the Advocate was the only source that reported that many of the people gathered there that evening were MCC people who gathered there to worship. We've had our churches burned and vandalized. We've had pastors and leaders harassed and assaulted and even murdered. None of us got here easily. But the writer of Hebrews says, recall those earlier days when you endured. Now here's what it doesn't say. It doesn't say live in the past.
All right.
It doesn't say obsess about the past. It doesn't say catalog and review and regret every injustice that you have ever suffered. Occasionally I have listened to people who could literally recite a litany of every injustice they ever suffered, every bad relationship they ever survived, every lover who ever did them wrong. And in my mind's eye, I can see them going home, and in the backyard they have this little injustice garden. And they fertilize it and they water it just to keep it alive. And sometimes all you can say is, what an extraordinarily courageous and resilient person you must be to have been able to survive all of that. The writer of Hebrews says, remember the past. Remember where you came from. Don't forget what you've already endured. And here is why. Because the past is not supposed to be a source of shame or regret for us, but of courage and confidence and endurance. Until Tom and I moved to Southern California in 1980, I was unfamiliar with the tradition of putting little crosses beside the road to mark the locations of serious accidents where people were injured or even died. If we were honest, many of us would admit that our individual journeys are marked with little crosses. And many of our communities of faith's journeys are marked with little crosses. There are those places where we were knocked down, or we were disappointed, or our souls were insulted, or even where we suffered little emotional or spiritual deaths. But when we look back on those things now, we can see that every single time God picked us up and breathed new life into us. When we look back now, just like this cross that we lift above us when we worship, the love and grace of God can change those little crosses too, from signs of death to signs of hope and victory. First of all, remember where you came from. Remember what you have endured, and realize that it makes you a remarkable, resilient, and courageous person. And then, in verse 37, do not therefore abandon that confidence of yours. It brings a great reward. For you need endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive what has been promised. First of all, hold the past in remembrance. Second, keep the vision in sight. Keep the vision in sight. We in MCC have accepted the challenge of a really magnificent vision for ourselves and for our future. You know, there is the religion of Jesus, and then there is a religion about Jesus. And when we ask, and I often do, what in the world is going on with so many people in this world today who call themselves Christians, it is at least because they're all about the religion about Jesus instead of the religion of Jesus. So we have said we're going to create a church like the world has never seen before. It will be based on the religion of Jesus. Its values will be diversity and inclusivity and compassion and justice. And we're going to do this by proclaiming God's unconditional love for every single person equally. And that is just asking for it.
All right.
If you walk into a Baptist church or a Methodist church or a Catholic church or an Episcopal church, you can be pretty sure that everybody who gathers there regularly believes pretty much the same thing, or they wouldn't be there. You put 5 MCCers together and you're going to have 11 different ideas about how every single thing should be done. I've only been with you for 3 days, but I don't have any reason to think you're any different than anybody else. This business of actually welcoming and including everyone is not easy. There are days when I think I never want to hear the words diversity and inclusivity again, as long as I live. But then I lift that vision up. And I see what it could mean for us, for our world, for the church of Jesus Christ. When I see the power of that vision to change racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, all those things that divide us. When I see how it could make the religion of Jesus real in the world, then I know what the prophet meant when he said, where there is no vision, the people perish. Or as we sometimes translate that, where there is no vision, the people will go to another parish. Several years ago, I got off a plane to visit one of our MCC churches in one of our larger cities in this country, and a board member met me at the airport to drive me into the church, and on the way they said, well, we're just a tiny little church, but we really like it like that. So I spent the weekend telling them why they needed to stop liking it like that. It's not having a great vision like ours that is frightening. It is not having one. But make no mistake, this vision makes us different from many other people. It makes us different from many other churches because we have actually decided that the more different we are from each other, the more important it is for us to be together. We have decided that it is more important for us to be together than it is for any of us to get our way all the time. Troy Perry used to say, if you come to MCC long enough, we're going to treat you so many different ways, you're eventually going to like one of them. Reverend Elder Lily Brock says, the only way MCC is going to work is if you're sitting on one side of the church and we're singing something or saying something and you don't like it, it's going to be blessing somebody sitting right over here. And a few minutes later, we're going to do something that you're going to love and they're not going to like it. And that's got to be all right with all of us, because it's more important to be together than it is that any of us gets our way all the time. Those of us who've been around for a long time doing this, we have what I call core stories. We have our stories from our past that just sort of encapsulate what MCC means to us. I want to share with you one of my favorite core stories. In 1986, I was the pastor of MCC in the Valley in North Hollywood and a member of the Southern California Ecumenical Council. And we were having a council meeting in the office of the Methodist bishop over in Pasadena. And there was an Episcopal priest there and a Catholic priest there. And they were having a conversation about the dialogue going on in their two churches about whether they might be able to take communion together by the year 2000. And of course, you may know that shortly after that, the Episcopal Church started ordaining women, and they broke off the conversation. Now, probably never. But I said to them, if you're interested in knowing what it looks like when people from all different faith traditions take communion together, come to MCC. We do it every single Sunday. 3 weeks later, he called me and said, Ken, I just got a call from the World Council of Churches, and they're sending a visitation team to the LA area, and they want me to set up their itinerary, and I want to bring them to MCC. So he gave me a date and a time. It was a Saturday morning. He said, have some of your most articulate people there. You know, he said, now they're going to be on a very tight schedule, and they're only going to have about 25 or 30 minutes. And so that Saturday morning came, and we were sitting around drinking coffee, eating donuts. I heard sirens, and they kept getting louder and louder. I thought, I need to go check this out. So I walked out and looked down Cahuenga Boulevard, and there were 12 uniformed police motorcycle officers leading a line of black stretch limousines as far as I could see. And they pulled into our parking lot. This was the World Council of Churches visitation team. And then there were 2 big black vans. The first one opened up and security people got out and swept the building to be sure it was safe. And then international press got out of the other one and set up all around the back of our sanctuary. Then the chauffeurs started opening the doors of these limousines, each of which was flying the flag of a different nation, and out stepped all of these bishops and prelates from all over Europe and Asia and Africa and South America. Many of them wearing these big, beautiful robes, and some of them with translators, and they came in and filled up our little sanctuary. And they started asking us questions. And we were trying to answer their questions. The first thing I noticed was 25, 30, 35 minutes went by, and they hadn't even slowed down. The second thing was that they had not asked us one simple question about the thing that we thought they were going to be most interested in, which was that most of us were sexual minority people. You know what they wanted to know? How do you do this? How is it possible for people from all these different traditions, liturgies, histories, theologies, to come together in one place without hurting each other? Because that's our history, you know. If I can't convert you, I've got to hurt you. Finally, there was someone, a bishop, I think, from somewhere in Northern Europe, and he was sitting back on the back left side, and I was watching him because I could tell he was getting agitated. And finally, he stood up, and through his translator, he asked this question: how is it possible for you to come to this table together and take communion when you don't even believe the same thing about it? Some of you believe in transubstantiation, some of you in consubstantiation. Some of you believe in real presence, others of you don't. Some of you think this is just a symbolic meal. How do you do this? And Judy Longman, a lay woman in our church, didn't miss a beat. She said, that's easy for us. We just believe that if you'll come up here, God can turn this into anything you need for it to be. You should have seen their faces. These were supposed to be the most brilliant ecclesiological minds in the world. And it never occurred to them that if they just got over themselves and came up here together, that God is able to turn this into whatever you need for it to be. While the past is not supposed to be a place of shame or regret for us, the writer of Hebrews then says, do not abandon that confidence of yours. So the future is not supposed to be a place of fear or timidity for us either, but of confidence and boldness. So we learn to remember the past without regret. We learn to believe in our future with boldness, but we don't live in the past, do we? We don't live in the future either. So finally, but we are not among those who shrink back and so are lost. We are among those who have faith and so are saved. I think my favorite verse in Hebrew Scripture is also from the prophet Isaiah. Those who wait upon the Lord shall have their strength renewed. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Sometimes I think it is easier to run and not be weary than it is just to walk and not faint. If the running is the exciting, fun, rewarding, sometimes even easy part of this being faithful, and if the walking is the steady, consistent, every day, one foot in front of the other, sometimes hard part, that it's easier to run than it is just to walk. So what does this mean for you right now? It means that that magnificent vision that we just talked about was not shaped by us. That vision is shaped by God, and then it is given to us. You know, I've always said I don't believe God woke up on that morning in October of 1968 and looked out and said, I just don't think there are enough Christian churches yet. I'm going to make one more. We're here for a reason. This magnificent vision was shaped by God and given to us. But if we accept it, then it shapes us. So this is not a time to sit back. This is not a time to wait and see what's going to happen around here. This is a time to pray for your church and its leaders. This is a time for you to step up and say, I'm putting my time and my talent and my money behind this vision because I believe that the human family and the planet have never needed it more than right now. And I can't think of anything I could do with my life or my resources that's more important than this right now. So the message of the writer of Hebrews for us today is that our past gives us courage and confidence when we learn to remember it without shame or regret. That our future gives us vision and inspiration when we face it with boldness and courage. And that our faithfulness right here, right now in this church today turns dreams into reality. God bless you, SunCoast. The Spirit of God is upon you. Amen.